Once again, thank you all for joining us. This is Nuance, and we'll be speaking of Police Officer Jonathan Diller's tragic killing in Far Rockaway. Of course, I'm Mike Scala, joined by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Um, same old. Just looking at this change, this change in slang that seems to be going around this past week. Um,
This
it's
past
not
week.
it's yeah, yeah. So in I guess New York slang, when
Are you talking
people
about
is
the Diddy thing?
yeah, the no Diddy,
Okay.
they're kind of changing instead of saying like pause or something like that, they'll say no Diddy.
Yeah. Isn't it kind
So
of odd? Not to get too deep into this, but in the, I guess, 80s, 90s, it would be AO, and then you would use pause as protection against the AO, right? Which is kind of like a silly game that people would play, especially in New York. But
mm.
then that morphed in the 2000s into That's What She Said. It's the same game, but they just changed the terminology.
Is it the same though?
I think so. The same types of things that you would say that would get you paused, or that you would pause to protect against the AO, it became That's What She Said.
I haven't thought about that. It didn't seem like they'd be the same thing, but
Right. It doesn't intuitively, you wouldn't think that, but the same types of expressions that, because if I just remember that in the 2000s, or whenever people started saying that, That's what she said. I would take note in my head when someone would say something that in the 90s would be AO, became that in the 2000s.
mm. Well, it seems
Anything
like
that really is like, is sexually suggestive, I guess, unintentionally, right?
it seems like now it's going to be no Diddy for a while.
That's,
Uh,
yeah, that bothers me a little bit because don't we have due process? Isn't everyone innocent until proven guilty?
um, this is absolutely true. And in that case, apparently his house was just raided yesterday.
Right.
And
Right.
his sons were arrested, it appears.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't want to speak prematurely on anything. And usually, when something like that happens, there is something substantial to go off of. Usually, houses aren't rated on a hunch, right? But we don't have anything concrete yet. At least that's been
Right.
public, made
Yeah.
public. Obviously, tons of accusations and lawsuits, but just because you sue someone to make an allegation, that
Right.
doesn't create the basis for the feds raiding your house either. I mean, you can accuse them of
Absolutely.
anything in a lawsuit that hasn't proven anything. So, because don't we have due process? Isn't every
Sorry about that.
that
Facebook automatically plays it when the thing comes up. But yeah, you're absolutely right. He still gets due process. And yeah, I've always had an issue with things like this, or actually in general, being reported in the media before it goes through the courts, because then the court of public opinion already forms their idea, and it doesn't matter even what the court has to say afterwards. Some people will hold on to that premature view. Just like there's still some people who have this view of Kobe Bryant as committing these sexual assault uh, actions, even though he was found not guilty in court. But because it's what played out in the media, that goes with him.
well, the other thing also is any court proceedings can be influenced by what's reported in the media,
Right.
right? It could poison the jury pool, for instance. Now, it's not supposed to, right? The system is supposed to weed out that bias and figure out who won't be influenced by it, but people are people, and it could certainly have an
Right.
effect on the outcome of a case, right? At the same time, I think there's a First Amendment right to report what's happening, and reporters have that right to put information out there that they've attained.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, there's got to be some kind of a balance or some way of communicating that minimizes the way that it sways the public one way or the other, because it can be unfair,
Sure. Well, then,
especially in the face of innocent until proven guilty.
right. Well, should the onus be on the public then to not be so influenced by the headlines or the clickbait, right? Obviously, the public is being manipulated in some ways by media outlets. And so you can't put it all on them. But at a certain point, should we as a population say, listen, we're not going to fall for the okie doke?
We should, but that's not what's going to happen. People are going to take in, I mean, it's kind of, marketing. Repeated messages is what goes in as influence. And so the more often it's repeated in the media, the more people are going to believe it. And it's going to be a case of, guilty until proven innocent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just
But I think that we have a better
maybe certain
shot at
details shouldn't be
attacking
released
it
still.
from that angle. I think that, again, because there are constitutional rights at play, and because it's so ingrained in our system that we report incidents before a legal resolution, because legal resolutions sometimes take forever, right? I mean, it could be years later when it's not even news anymore. So we're not going to change the system to make it that incidents cannot be reported until they've been through trial, they've been through the court. That's not going to happen. I think we have a better chance at chipping away at it from the public's perspective.
I think that if those are the two options, the one that we absolutely have control over is preventing it from being reported or preventing from certain details from being reported, then trying to
Totally.
convince 350 million people to think a different way.
We don't
I
have
think
control over that. If not, if it's constitutional, if it's the First Amendment issue, the press has freedom of the press. They have a right to report it. We have a better shot, I think, at
they
changing.
have a
I'm not
right to
saying,
report it. They have
yeah,
a right to report it, but that they can still prevent law enforcement and whatnot from speaking on it.
the press, who can? You mean the courts?
The courts or the organizations, the press can go and ask all the questions they want, but if law enforcement doesn't say, hey, this is what he's charged with, this is what we arrested him for, this is what the details are that we've got so far, if they don't say that, the press has nothing to report. So that type of stuff can be prevented from being put out into the public or say, look, we can only say this much because there's an ongoing court case. We already do it to some degree. It's just maybe we need to dial it back more and be like, okay, look, maybe, Diddy's home was raided. Why? Or Diddy's being sued. Well, we don't tell why, just that maybe he's being sued. Maybe that's an amount of information as far as we put out in the public until it goes through the court.
Well, I mean, when things get filed, they become public record, if they're electronically filed generally.
Yeah.
Also, lawyers sometimes want the filings out there. They want the publicity because maybe they're trying
Sure.
to influence what goes on in the public
Yeah.
opinion. So, these things are done deliberately quite often. There are
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
sometimes gag orders put in place, like we saw with the Trump case here in New
Right.
York. So that does happen to various degrees as well. But
Yeah.
I don't think, especially in today's age where everyone has a camera on their phone, I don't think we're going to stop that kind of information from getting out there. For example, when the feds raid a mansion in Miami and Hollywood, whatever, people are going to see that, when their helicopters swarm or whatever, people are going to see that and they're going to capture that. I think if that is going to be out there anyway, we probably do want accurate reporting about what's going on rather than just leaving it up to rumors and people just speculating.
Yeah. And I guess I can see that, but just there needs to be some sort of remedy in place then for people who get dragged through the court of public opinion and come out on the other side innocent. Because that kind of that kind of conclusion will just follow them for the rest of their lives, regardless of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a problem. But like I said, I really do think at least a big part of the solution here is to educate folks on this. Let's educate ourselves that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. People know that phrase, they hear it. I
Yeah.
think people are skeptical of it, and rightly so, because we do see that oftentimes people are treated as guilty until proven innocent unfairly, right?
Yeah.
But I
It's
don't
highly optimistic.
we need
350
to we need
million
to push
people.
back against that concept. I think we as a people have to, even if it takes education, like listen, don't believe the headlines. People know that, I think, in their gut, but they're still maybe subliminally or subconsciously influenced by it sometimes too much, right? Because I think if you go to tell people, listen, don't believe the headlines, everyone is innocent until proven guilty, what are they going to say? I know, right? But they still kind of are influenced by it to some degree. I think we're all guilty of that. We're all humans, right? But we should
Yeah.
be doing more, I think, to be cognizant of it at least.
Yeah, I think it's a very optimistic view because, you're talking about trying to get 350 million people or whatever our population is to agree in
I'm
that
not
regard.
saying that though. I'm not saying that. I'm saying we can chip away at the problem. I'm not saying you make every last person think a certain way. I'm saying you push back against the issue, right? You influence the way that this is perceived by the public. It's not about getting to every last individual.
Yeah, but it's just I think there's just too many people to there's too many people that are going to believe it anyway, regardless. I mean, look at what we're facing, and not to go way far off topic, look at what we're facing with the January 6th thing,
Mhm.
There are people who actually believe the BS from one way instead of what actually happened, even if they watched it with their own eyes.
That's always going to happen, right? Especially in a
Yeah.
polarized climate, you're always going to have. But that doesn't give you a reason not to fight back against,
Oh no, no, absolutely fight back. Sure.
right, or to just throw in the towel and act like, well, because so many people still believe this, is useless trying to correct the record or trying to push back. Like, no, I think you definitely do that. You do more of it.
No, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, you definitely push back and whatnot. I'm just saying it's very optimistic to think that that is something that is going to be overcome. I think it's a little bit optimistic.
But I think that that's the best way, the best tool we have right now to fight back against it. I think that factor is always going to be present, maybe even prevalent, but we should do what we can to chip away at it, is my point. I think that's the best thing that we can do, right? Keep reminding people, especially in the social media world. I mean, this is a new world, really, that we're still trying to get accustomed to as a society, right? The world of social media and information spreading instantaneously. And I think we need to keep in mind now we're entering the world of AI and things are going to be faked a lot more easily,
Oh
right?
boy.
And
Yeah, it's coming.
we all should have a lot more skepticism about accusations and finger pointing and all that. Let
That's absolutely true.
let the facts bear out, let the legal proceedings happen.
That's
So, well, I want to get to our main topic here. I know a lot of people are tuning in to talk about it, and we all as a community are dealing with it right now. We have the police officer who was killed really locally, right? Very hyper local issue here in Queens. This happened in Far Rockaway. And such a tragic situation. You had what would appear to be a routine traffic stop, right? The officer instructing a gentleman to get out of his car, the guy refusing to do so, and ultimately opening fire on the officer and killing him. And then you had the officer's partner firing back. There were actually two people in this car. One was wounded, and now it seems the driver of the car, who ended up firing the gun at the officer and killing him, had 21 prior convictions. Last year, I think it was in April of 2023, had a gun possession charge and was back out on the street. So, of course, so many questions about this. How could this happen? What should we be doing about it? How has the system failed us? Who's to blame? A lot of finger pointing going on, as you can imagine, right? As people are trying to process all of this, we of course should mention the police officer had a young child. I mean, just a tragic situation for a life to be taken in that manner. And people justifiably outraged and heartbroken at this moment.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, are there any other any details or anything that's come forth? Any
Well,
other details?
I don't know if there are. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else there is beyond that. Some are speculating as to why the perpetrator would open fire like that
Right,
randomly. I mean, if not randomly, in an arbitrary manner. I mean, that's something that doesn't usually happen, right? Is it
right.
severe mental illness? Is what was he trying to hide something from being discovered in the car? Right? I mean, that could be a possibility. Well, I haven't heard anything was found that that would cause that kind of response. So, it's one of those things that you would never expect to happen in a million years.
Right. Yeah, that's Yeah, it's very tragic.
And there was a comment by Howie Swatch. You remember Howie, right, from the Wave? He,
Yeah.
of course, retired, but he was the editor of the Wave up until say around 2012, right? Maybe it's 2013. Um,
Hmm.
he had a comment on the Wave's story about this on Facebook, and he mentioned gun laws. He said, actually, interestingly, he said the solution is to vote for Democrats at the national level because of the gun regulations that they'll advocate, but to get rid of what he described as the crazy leftists on the city council, because he said they were responsible for some of this attitude and some of these issues in the city. And he got some pushback on that. You had some people saying that, and I hate this myself. People say that, well, criminals don't follow gun laws, so the gun laws don't matter. That is complete NRA propaganda bullshit, right? But it's a shame that people still repeat that point. And I want to get into that because we actually have some numbers on that point to show why that's so wrong. But people, of course, were disagreeing with him on the gun issue. And then you had people saying, well, if you want to talk about local politics, bail reform in particular is a state issue. So that really had nothing to do with the city council. But his point was, I guess, at the federal level, you want to fight for gun regulation, through Congress, and locally, maybe at the city and state level, do more to keep criminals off the streets. What are your thoughts?
I'm not sure, but the national level I understand. The local level is what's confusing, and what he means by keeping the leftists off of the city councils. Like, I'm not
Well,
sure.
yeah, I'm not sure exactly what policies he was referring to when he said that.
Right.
It was like even I think it was even his son commented that bail reform is a state issue. It's funny because for those who don't know, Howie is a Democrat, his son Robbie is a Republican, and so they are going to clash over politics. But it's funny
Must be
to see them
must be
fighting
fun
on Facebook.
Thanksgivings.
Yeah, right. They're going back and forth on Facebook about it, but I'm not sure exactly what policies he was referring to, if it was bail reform in particular, which, as we said, is really a state issue, or is it just this idea of, for example, defund the police, which is not something that people talk about much anymore. I think the consensus is that that was always a bad message at this point, but these ideas, these type of ideas, came from the leftists at the city level, right, through the city council.
Mm, yeah, I'd probably want a little bit more clarification from him what he meant in that regard. Because yeah, I can't think of what else that would be. I mean,
I believe it's just this general idea of a climate that seems to be anti-cop and even apologetic for people who commit crimes.
there could be. I mean, I think, in that regard, I think we do need, I agree with at the national level, someone that's going to fight for uh, this gun control stuff. I mean, at this point, we've seen it over and over again as far as why this is necessary, why we need gun control, why we need better background checks, all of that stuff. It's like beating a dead
Right, I mean,
horse.
and can we start with the idea that this particular person should not have had that gun with 20
Yeah, with these
prior convictions?
21 priors, yeah, like why are you now? The question now, at the same time, is like, did he go through a process? Probably not. Do we know if it was an illegal gun? Where did the gun come from? We can
Right,
ask
right.
all those
And so
questions.
that's the point I want to get into. Are we ready to go there? Because I've got a lot actually on this point, and maybe it might look like a little bit of a tangent, even though it's related to this. So maybe
Mm,
before we get into that, there's certainly argument now. And look, people have a tendency to politicize everything. And I think that's even what we were alluding to before with just
right.
we're in the climate that we find ourselves in. And so you have people who are using this to further their political agendas, in my estimation.
Sure.
So you have people saying, pushing back against Howie, who I think left a balanced, do you think she's trying to leave a balanced, nuanced type of comment, right? And people were
Right.
saying, listen, you're wrong, you missed the mark there. The solution is to vote Republican at every level of government. And of course, they go back in and they start saying that, this is because of Democratic policies. They don't really give specifics though as to which policies they're speaking of. So I can only try to be charitable to their position and fill in the gaps, right?
It's hyper partisanship.
Um, but yeah, and I read through this as I think most of the people who are commenting this way already had their agenda going in. And so I don't think that they're approaching the subject fairly. I think that they're looking for incidents like this one that they can point to and say, see, we were right all along.
Absolutely.
Their agenda really is coming from a different place. And so I would be careful with that type of messaging. But that's what you see. And not just when a tragedy happens. You see that on everything now. I mean, it could be a very mundane thing happening. And you'll see the same
Right.
people saying, this is what happens when you keep voting Democrat. You know what I mean? Like, it's just their agenda. It's like they're just programmed to always repeat that point. And maybe you
Yeah.
can see that Republicans are good at that, or at least effective at that. But I do think that, especially when you start becoming manipulative in a way like this, I think it does cross the line into distasteful.
Right. Yeah, it happens on every point. And even to that point, this incident could have been a one-off, right? Regardless of who was running or what the, what agenda was the governing law of the day, whoever was in office. This incident could have happened one way or the other, but it doesn't mean that we get complacent about being proactive and in preventing things like this from happening.
Right, right. You know, so you made the point about the gun. Obviously, someone with that kind of record is not going to, in New York, at least, be able to get a gun legally, right? So where does the gun come from? Now, we talked about this law that we advocated for. In fact, I went on Democrats Abroad to talk about the legislation. It was a state of origin database, right? Showing exactly where the guns recovered in crimes are coming from. Because if people want to keep repeating that point, which is demonstrably false, but they keep wanting to say that gun laws make no difference whatsoever because criminals don't follow the laws, right? I mean, if you really take a few seconds to think about that statement, I think you realize on its face that's a pretty preposterous thing to say. But let's get the numbers now to show that, right? Let's look at the data to show it. So we did get this legislation passed. Of course, I wasn't the only one. We weren't the only people advocating for it. There were many people who got on board with this idea and pushed for it. It became a law in New York, and it requires the state police to publish quarterly reports of guns that are recovered from crimes in New York and give us information about them, including where they come from. Now, I was able last night to go online and pull up the last report that was made available. I've got it here. Just click on this link and pull it up. But I sent it to you, Jay. I don't know if we want to do a share screen or we want to get it on here so other people can see it. I know I sent this to you as well.
The PDF?
Yes. It says New York State Crime Gun Report, October 1st, 23 to December 31st, 23.
Yep.
So it does have some useful stats on here, but it's a one-page PDF. It's really a summary of data. It isn't the complete data set. It's a summary. And in fact, it has the top 10 firearm purchaser county and state with a New York recovery location. So interesting, but there's nothing in the law that says that they should have a top 10. I think maybe the law might need a little more meat on it to specify exactly what they should be reporting, but I'm not even sure it needs that. They may be outside the compliance of the law here because no, you tell me if you think that what they actually have provided is sufficient under the law. Because the law says the Division of State Police, in consultation with the Division of Criminal Justice Services, shall publish quarterly reports on their respective websites, okay, with information related to firearms, rifles, and shotguns used in the commission of crimes in the state of New York. Okay, so that's a little bit vague. Information related to the guns. Okay, but then it goes on, including, but not limited to, information pertaining to the county and state of origin of the firearm, rifle, or shotgun, the county and state where the firearm, rifle, or shotgun was purchased, whether the firearm, rifle, or shotgun was purchased by the perpetrator of the crime or by another individual, and whether the perpetrator had a license or permit to possess such firearm, rifle, or shotgun. And the thing I want to point out about the wording of this law is that every time it mentions firearm, rifle, or shotgun, it's in the singular form. It's not pluralized. And so I think that that tells you that the law is asking for every instance to be reported, not just for a summary of all of the guns that were used generally, right? They're saying information pertaining to the county and state of origin of the firearm, not of all the guns, of the firearm. Doesn't that suggest that every time a firearm is recovered, we have to have the information about it?
Right. Maybe this is just a summary, or is this the complete report?
This is what's available on their website. You know what? I'm going to contact them and ask for more clarity on that, because this, as far as I can tell, is all they're providing the public.
Right.
Right? A top 10, nothing in that law would suggest they should be getting a top 10 list of counties. But all right, let's delve into it, because this is what they have available to us right now. The top 10 list of counties where guns were purchased, right? So this is where the gun was originally purchased before it made its way to being used in a crime in New York. Yes, you do have some upstate counties in New York here. In fact, there's Monroe County, New York, Genesee County, Nassau County, and Erie County by Buffalo. So those are in the top 10. The other 6 are all in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida.
Right.
So what does that tell you? What do we know about the laws of Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida?
Right.
These are states where it's much easier to purchase a gun, right? Without the kinds of checks that we do here.
Right.
New York City, right? You look at, because it shows you where the guns are recovered. The number 1 county is Kings. Number 2 county is the Bronx. So Brooklyn and the Bronx is where most of the guns have been recovered in crimes. Neither one of those counties is on the list of where the guns are coming from. The most prominent counties where the guns are. You don't see, in fact, any New York City county in there. Is it a coincidence that it's tougher to buy a gun legally in New York City? Right? If most of the guns are being recovered in Brooklyn and the Bronx, why is it that most of the guns weren't purchased in Brooklyn and the Bronx?
And this is a quarterly report, so this could change. Yeah, when you spend it out over the year.
Well, go back and look at the previous one. You know, there was a study that showed that up to 90% of guns recovered in crimes in New York City did not come from New York at one point.
Right.
No one should be saying that gun laws don't matter. Because if gun laws didn't matter, your top 6 of the top 10 counties where guns came from wouldn't be in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. Why aren't they coming from New Jersey? Why aren't they more coming from New York? Why aren't they coming from DC or Maryland? Why are the top 6 counties in Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida of the top 10? You know,
right.
Are they going to say that's a coincidence? Is anyone going to sit here with a straight face and tell me that's just a coincidence?
Right.
You know, and then people talk about, well, you can 3D print your own guns now. And so that's used as an argument for why gun laws don't matter. But this report right here suggests 74 firearms recovered or privately made out of the almost 1,800 firearm traces. So yeah, I think they call those ghost guns, right? The privately made guns, 3D printed guns, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, it is increasingly becoming a problem, but it doesn't account for anywhere close to the majority of guns. What are we looking at? Less than 10% here? just because that is also happening doesn't mean that you wave the white flag and just give up on the issue, right? I mean, again, people have these agendas. I think they fall into these partisan traps, and they say, "I'm just going to advocate for this position because what my team says I should, because the propaganda says I should, even if it defies logic, reason, and sense." So
Right.
I think it's important to have these numbers. And again, I don't think these numbers are complete. I don't think they're reporting as much as the law mandates that they do. Because at first I was thinking, do we need to go in and amend the law? Do we have to have more wording in here to actually make it clear that for every crime where a gun is used illegally, we need to see the information on that gun as opposed to just a summary, a snapshot, a one pager? That wasn't what I intended. I'm telling you that right now. When I was drafting a version of this in 2016 in Albany, I was not intending for the public to only have a snapshot of the top 10, right? Your top 10 hits. That's not what this was. This was supposed to be data on every instance. And again, you don't have to have personal information in there, right? If there are certain things you want redacted about, the victims' identities, or yes, that's fine. But from a data perspective, I want to be able to, maybe have a date of the incident. I want to know. Let's be real. This particular gun, I think you asked the question, where did it come from? Wouldn't that be powerful information as opposed to having a top 10 list on a website? Wouldn't it be nice to know where this gun came from that killed one of our officers?
And I would assume they have that data. I mean, it was collected at the
Compile
time.
this.
It's just
I
not
want to
public.
do a share screen here for those watching the live video. Because if they have this, they're only making this with the data, right? You can only compile a chart like
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
summary
Like
with,
to make this, they have to have that data.
yeah.
So yeah, they've definitely got it. Do you have the link to where people can find these reports?
Yeah, I put it in the chat on the Zoom. Do you want to put it in the other chat on Facebook?
That's the direct link to this PDF report. Where's the page that lists all of the quarterly reports?
Gotcha. That okay. Let's see if I have that up here
Because
too.
I went through and I just looked at when you were talking here, I was
Yeah.
look at some of the others, and there were at least three others, but they had to come up in search. And in
Okay.
each instance, it was 7 out of the 10 places were outside of New York, and majority seems to be Georgia.
Georgia, right? Yeah.
Georgia seems to be the big baddie.
Yeah. So I'm looking on this chart here. Gwinnett County, Georgia, Cobb County, Georgia, Henry County, Georgia. Then you have Broward County, Florida, which is the Fort Lauderdale area, and
Right.
Wilson County, South Carolina. Clayton County, Georgia, as well as on here. So yeah, I mean, I think we have to wake up to the fact that this is not a coincidence. And I'm also interested to see Virginia, because I know Virginia used to be a big culprit as far as the illegal guns, but the Virginia legislature went blue recently, and so I'm wondering if they changed their laws such that you don't see Virginia on these charts anymore.
Hmm.
So, all right, we're looking for. So it's actually on the. Let me see if I can. First of all, let me do the share screen while I'm here. Let me do the share screen so people can see what this looks like. Here we go. Tell me if this comes up on the screen.
Yep, got it.
Got it. So you see it's literally just a summary page. I mean, it does have some interesting information. Like there you see it breaks down every county of New York, and it tells you how many guns were recovered from each of those counties. So that
Right.
is interesting to look at. Like you see some of those counties upstate have only one. Some looks like have zero. They're just not filled in at all. And then you have
Mhm.
ones here, like 180 over here. Then you've got New York City. They've got that chart showing you 309 from Kings, 240 from Bronx, 136 from Manhattan, 113 Queens, and so forth. So that is interesting. But again, I don't think it complies completely with the law, which, according to my reading, suggests that they would have to show this type of data for every crime, not just a summary. So I should be able to look up when, for example, this particular case or any case, anytime this is gun recovered in a crime, I should be able to go online and scroll down and ask, where did that gun come from? Oh, I see, that gun came from Florida. I get it. That's what we want.
And
So
they have that information
they just
because they,
haven't, as far as I've seen, they haven't published it. So I'm gonna stop
right,
the share here. And this is where I found it. You go to troopers.ny.gov. That's the state police website. Troopers.ny.gov.
right,
And let's see where this was. I had a search for it. I believe it was under publications. Let me see if I'm scrolling down on here. See, this is why also it wasn't very easy to find. It's kind of buried somewhere. Uh, you have to look for it. There, you go down to the bottom of the page, all the way on the bottom of the page, where it says New York State Police, and they've got the list of pages on the site. Publications is actually the last one, the very last page on the right side. You click on
right,
right, New York State Police publications. Now, these are the reports that they're required to publish by law.
right,
And they've got here a New York State Police annual gun dealer inspection report. You can scroll down and you see now one of the first ones posted, quarterly crime gun report for the fourth quarter of 2023. You keep scrolling down, you'll see, for example, the third quarter of 2023 and so forth.
yeah, yeah,
So here, I'm gonna put that link in here as well.
yeah. I put it in the chat.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I just saw Virginia Beach. Okay, I'm scrolling. I'm going back now to the third quarter in 23, and Virginia Beach, VA did make it, as well as Jefferson County, Alabama. They both made the top 10.
Right.
So we need to keep an eye on how these laws are changing in these states and how that's affecting the prevalence of guns coming into New York. Right.
Right.
And this data is useful. Hopefully, we'll get more of it and we can analyze it even further. But even from what we've seen so far, I mean, it tells a very compelling picture. I think it's not a coincidence that a lot of these guns are being trafficked from the South. So
Right.
I do think we need to stop letting people spread that false message that laws have no bearing on guns. That's a personal issue for me, and a very important one. I've said this also: guns aren't the entire solution, right? You can't say if you have perfect gun laws that violence against police or any kind of violence will never happen. No, there are other ways you have to attack these issues as well, right?
Right.
So we do have to look at that. Mayor Adams at a press conference, he said this is a problem of recidivism. It is disturbing that you have someone with that many priors still out freely able to commit crimes like this, right?
Yeah. 20, what was it, 2021,
Yeah.
22? That's crazy.
So aside from tackling the illegal gun problem, what type of measures might we advance to prevent something like this or mitigate the likelihood of this happening again?
Yeah, I mean that has to be, if you're looking at it from a point where people are bringing guns in from outside of the state, that means it has to be some kind of a nationwide agreed upon measure because otherwise people will just go to other places and bring it through. Doesn't mean you don't stop, you don't take care of it locally as well, but that has to be on the table as well.
You're talking about the guns?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that is true. We need more uniformity, and that's why we need Congress to act. But even when it comes to local laws, again, it's not going to be a silver bullet, right? But let's say every state in the Eastern time zone had tougher laws, right? Um, People wouldn't be able to traffic them as easily from Florida, from South Carolina, from Virginia, even from Georgia. Wouldn't that
Mm.
do something? Because now, sure, you'll still have some trafficking, but at least people will have to drive them longer distances. I mean, you know, What if they all
Right.
had to come from the West Coast? I'm sure that would have an impact on the gun crimes we see in New York.
Yeah, I mean the if you're looking at just the reports in those top 10 counties, the majority are along that eastern seaboard type of
I-95, right?
yeah. So yeah, I mean if that would obviously make a difference, some sort of a difference.
Right.
Not that people
Beyond,
wouldn't,
beyond,
but
I know, I agree with that. We need more uniformity, and New York is doing its job when it comes to gun laws. But if we see the guns aren't coming from New York, well, other states need to do their job, certainly. But
yeah.
beyond that, right, and and beyond even what can happen at the federal level with guns, beyond guns, period, what can be done about recidivism? About this idea, and by the way, for whatever reason, right? I mean, some of it is based in truth, some of it may be based in propaganda, but the public largely has a perception that police are just arresting people and they're out on the streets immediately, no matter what they do, right? Even though we know that's
Right.
really the case. But the perception is that you can essentially get away with murder in New
Right.
York now, and you'll be back on the street tomorrow, and there'll be no repercussions ever, like this guy.
Yeah, and that's not the case. That's all propaganda from, different parts of the argument trying to push their own agenda and they overblow certain things.
But
Um,
it's not to say that there also isn't an issue, right? It gets greatly
sure,
exaggerated and fit into these agendas.
sure, but if it's exaggerated like that, it can blow things out of proportion
I'm
and make
sure,
people think
absolutely.
that something like, that like bail reform isn't they might think it's an evil when actually it could be something that's actually necessary, but someone's using it and twisting it in a way that fits their agenda.
Right. But again, this is nuance. We like to find the real solutions to these issues and not be
Yeah.
influenced by the partisan winds, right? Not fall into these neat boxes that the agendas tell us we should fall into. So I've said judges should have more discretion, right? It shouldn't be a one size fits all approach. Certain people shouldn't be out on the streets, right? And so I do think that we need to be looking at this from that nuanced viewpoint of sure they get exaggerated in both directions, right? And it seems at times we're just yelling past each other at this point. But there's
Hmm.
got to be solutions in there that do make sense and will address the underlying issues.
Yeah, there has to be something or some changes that can be done. Um, as far as
Recidivism.
that's the word right there. As far as that goes, I think we made a big mistake somewhere along the 80s nationwide, focusing more on punishment and than on rehabilitation.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Uh,
that really goes back to the 60s, honestly.
I'm sorry?
I think that really goes back more to the 60s under JFK.
But I think it was ramped up a little bit more under Reagan.
In the 80s, you
Even
had the
further
war on
under,
drugs and that sort of thing.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that idea of um, uh, instead of punishment that we're trying to reform can help reduce that sort of thing, because if you're looking at statistics and you're looking at causes and things, you know, some of it has to do with different environments and pasts and ways of thinking and opportunity and all this and that. If you can fix or help people along that route, then they'll be less likely to reoffend and come back into the system. And you might not have someone with 21 priors. Not saying that you won't, because some people are just
Yeah.
stuck on stupid. But you can
But
reduce
then
some of that. See
our
that happen in other countries that make those changes.
right, right. And I appreciate that point that we should at least be trying to
Yeah,
rehabilitate where it's possible because it seems like we've just abandoned that strategy. But
yeah,
then you
absolutely,
also think that some people are perhaps beyond rehabilitation.
absolutely. Oh, sure. There's definitely going to be some people that are beyond rehabilitation. Some people that just don't want it. Some people that are either they're just at their core just messed up, or they're just so broken that they can't go any other way. Like, but that doesn't mean that, we don't try with everyone, because I would imagine that there are more people who can be helped and who can be prevented from reoffending by doing more reform measures. So I think that's a route that we should definitely explore and
And the
bring
point
back to the
about bail that I think needs to be mentioned, some people seem to lose sight of it, is that even with bail, if you have the money, you can get out. And some people seem
table.
to think that bail means the person is going to be held indefinitely, but anyone with money can pay their bail and be out. I mean, that's prior to bail reform, right? That was always the case.
Right. It's yeah. It's just some cases like, bail was prohibitively uh high
Yeah,
for certain segments of the population, and so it was unfair. It's
right.
basically like, yeah, if you're rich, it's you can walk, but everyone else.
And that, right, that shouldn't be the determining factor,
Right.
right? How much money you have, your ability to pay bail shouldn't determine whether you get it or not, right? Whether you have freedom or not. So,
Right.
I think that needs to be part of the conversation as well. I think that aspect of it is often overlooked, sometimes deliberately, sometimes now I think people just forget about it, right? Because again, you have certain agendas out there talking about how
Absolutely.
this is the root of all of our problems. And then some people allow the situation to be boiled down into these very simple talking points when they're really much
Right.
more complex than that.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So,
And perhaps at a time like this, we all are in want of solutions, right? We all want to say, well, what can we do to prevent it from happening again? And that's normal and that's natural. That's even productive to search for those solutions. But I think there's also space for us to be able to say that unfortunately, these things do happen in our society. Tragedies occur, right? We all hate when they occur. They shouldn't. We should try to do everything we can to prevent them. But we can pass all the laws in the world. We can change all the policies. I mean, bad things are still going to happen. Um, I don't know what we should take away from that. Maybe just allow ourselves to understand that's just part of our world. Evil is always going to be out there in some respects. I mean, we just have to do what we can to fight it, right? But when it's never going to be a utopian society either.
yeah, I think in times like this, in tragedy, at times of tragedy, people are looking for blame, and having these types of and these, anytime something happens, everyone with an agenda and a point comes up and speaks at those moments, and then everyone's like, oh, well, you're just pushing your agenda. I think the things need to also be discussed during times that are not crisis times. Um, so that, people aren't acting out of just emotion in the moment, and perhaps cooler heads can prevail in that regard and have more nuanced conversation, more understanding, calmer discussions around the issues.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that maybe is what I was trying to drive at. That this is really a time where emotions are going to be high, and
Absolutely. Everyone wants blood, was going to want blood in the middle of a
yeah,
crisis.
but beyond that, maybe we should just give ourselves some space to grieve, right? And to
Yeah.
like have the moment of silences and the memorials for the officer and so forth. Honor what he did,
Yeah.
honor his family, right? Make his family feel supported. Um, and just give space for the fact that yes, this does occur. It's a tragedy every time it happens, but it is part of the world that we live in. And like you said, maybe cooler heads can prevail when we're outside the immediacy of the event. And we should
Right.
be focusing on solutions, not just when something happens. I mean, sometimes people say that the silver lining in a tragedy is it does kick some people into gear. It creates activists in some cases, and that's
Sure, sure.
a good thing. It's a good aspect of it. But I think that we maybe end up being too hard on ourselves if we don't confront the reality that there is evil, for lack of a better term. There's horrible stuff that happens in the world, and all we can do is strive to improve upon it. But it's unfortunately never going to be a perfect world.
I think where we can be hard on ourselves is not on ignoring that there's evil in the world, but on forgetting that there's evil in the world during times of calm, right? So people get in the middle of when nothing's happening and they think, oh, well, everything's perfect, and forgot that, last month there was something tragic. We
Mm,
have to remember that these things happen and work in even in those times and not just speaking up and speaking out or working towards these things during crisis or tragedy moments.
right, right.
So
But people are tired of tragedy after tragedy happening,
absolutely,
and
absolutely. And they should be.
nothing being done, right? Again,
They should be.
never get to perfection, but that shouldn't stop us from trying to address the problem and making it better, right? Making it
Yeah.
less bad, right?
Right.
Let's mitigate these. If we can't stop every tragedy from happening, well, if we can reduce the number by even a little bit, I think that that's good progress.
Absolutely. And that's what we should be trying to do. I mean, if you can chip away at it, if don't say that, oh, well, if we can't eradicate it to zero, then we don't do anything.
Right,
Uh,
right,
that's
right.
then nothing gets done.
Yeah,
If you can
right.
chip it away 10%, I mean, you've made progress, and then you work from there. Now you take that as your new normal and work from there, but you've made some advancement.
And that's
So,
the game that some people will play when they say, for example, oh, well, look, there are ghost guns, there are 3D printed guns, there are knives, you can use a bomb, you can use a car to kill someone. So it
right.
isn't the problem, right? That people's, again, literally an NRA talking point. Guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? That's what they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the idea there is to frustrate you into thinking that, well, because you'll never completely eradicate the problem of violence, then you
Right.
shouldn't do anything about guns.
Right.
And that's why I think it's important to give ourselves space to acknowledge that, yes, stuff is always going to happen, but that doesn't obviate the need to fight back and to do what we can to make things better. It's the more perfect union, right? We talked about that before. It's not
Absolutely.
perfect, it's improving the situation. You know,
Absolutely.
a good counterexample that you hear often is seatbelts, right?
Right.
Will say, well, there are still car crashes, even though we have seatbelt. People who get in car crashes still die sometimes, even if they're wearing a seatbelt. Does that mean that
Absolutely.
no one should ever wear a seatbelt and seatbelt laws are useless? Because that's the equivalent logically of the
Right.
idea that gun laws don't do anything because people will still get their hands on guns.
Right. Absolutely.
So
So,
maybe we can think about these things more logically. Maybe right as a tragedy is happening isn't the best time to ask for logic and reason to prevail. But again, I think we should be doing all we can to make that more the norm.
yeah,
Let's just try to chip away at the problem
absolutely.
for now. So,
Absolutely.
well, speaking of problems, we do have other issues that we've
We do. We had a,
discussed. We actually went a little long on this, and that's okay because it was
yeah,
a pretty substantive and topical conversation. We wanted to get into our poll from last week, and we wanted to talk about two other things, which I guess we can do briefly. We don't need to go into a whole long combos on them, but I think they're important to put out there, right? So I guess we can quickly cover our poll from last week about whether states should be able to deport people.
right. So, the poll question we put out last week was, should states be allowed to enforce immigration law and order deportations? And this was sparked by the fight that's going on in Texas, over SB 4, which would authorize state and local law enforcement to arrest and potentially deport people that they suspected to be in the state unlawfully. So, um, as most people know, immigration is under the realm of the federal government, and this would make a federal decision basically a state decision. And so that was what our question was about. And in the poll, 86% said no, states should not be allowed to enforce immigration law and order deportations. 14% said yes.
Okay.
So, yeah.
We would
Comment.
probably expect, as we
I'm
know,
sorry.
so it was probably about what you would expect, as we know, immigration policy is under the purview of the federal government. So for the states to try to enforce it themselves is an extraordinary and unusual measure.
Right. Yeah. Comments were light. It was just one that said they should certainly be allowed to deport those wearing MAGA hats.
That's funny.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, the issue, one of the issues, one, it being, unconstitutional, but also if other states started to follow suit, and then what kind of environment will we have in the country if every state is deporting people?
Right.
Uh,
Or if every state has its own distinct
right,
immigration and deportation policy, then it's like you have 50 or 51, if you want to count DC, countries,
right.
and you start fleeing from one country to the other, right? One state to the other to get a better crack at their immigration policy.
And yeah, and that's what would happen. And we're seeing a lot of this separation. A lot of it's along this partisanship lines, or at least prompted by partisanship. I mean, even with what is it from? I think it's from this year, or maybe it already went into effect that you technically can't fly from state to state unless you have either the real ID or you use your passport, which is ridiculous when you're
That's
traveling within
so.
the United States.
That's a law now.
The real ID, I think it's going to go into effect. It's either going into effect soon.
The real ID was supposed to help you so that you wouldn't need other. So you wouldn't need a passport for certain countries, or it's supposed to make it easier for you to travel.
No, real ID. It goes into effect on May 7th, 2025. U.S. travelers will have to have a real ID, or their driver's license or whatever must be real ID compliant to board domestic flights and access certain federal facilities. So they'll either
Right.
need that.
That was part of what they were trying to say. Also, you can get into like a, I guess, a social security building or something with it easier. I don't know.
Right. So yeah, or you'll have to use your passport to go from state to state if you don't have a real ID compliant form of identification. And this is just ridiculous because we're talking domestic travel, this separation. Um,
That's more
and
of an enhanced. When they say real ID, it's an enhanced version of your license, right?
I it's you have to go through a different process. You have to go in person and fill out some different forms. But just the fact that you would have to have a specific type of ID to travel domestically on flights, is to me is what I see as the separation of this what's supposed to be this United States, right? It's like traveling to different countries in that case. Like why would we need that? It's all the United States. The same with this immigration policy, right? It's every state shouldn't have its own immigration policy. We are the United States. There should be one national. It should be, of course, federal, like we've been doing. It's just this idea that everyone's pulling in different directions is
It's
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 not.
a good right. It's a good point. It seems like a byproduct of that extreme polarization, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. It's
And
we're
some of
acting
it
for
is,
our own country now. We're not even going to follow the federal government.
and let's not ignore that some of it has always been there, especially with the southern states that were former Confederate states, right?
Right.
They've
Well, there's
always had
Texas
this.
that we are talking of here, who does often speak of succeeding, right? And used to be our own
Yes.
country, in addition.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it seems like things are devolving in many ways, in many areas. So,
Mm.
but in regards to this, yeah, I think it would be not only it would be a headache, be tragic. Um, yeah, it just wouldn't be a good thing to have each state controlling immigration to the country.
Right, right. Yeah, we'll see what the
So,
Supreme Court does with it. To me, it seems obviously unconstitutional, but
right.
we live in a different time now, right? what
A
seemed
different time,
obvious.
different Supreme Court.
Yes, what seemed obvious up until now may not be interpreted as such by the current makeup of the court. So we'll see what happens with that. Um, Speaking of, I don't even know where to go with this one.
Uh-oh.
I guess speaking of seeing what happens, or speaking of, is this really a byproduct of our polarization, or maybe
Uh-oh.
it is. Maybe it is. No, I wanted to talk about the new Florida law that requires ID, right? A third party verification system to get on social media. And the idea is they're going to ban children under 14 from using social media, period. And if
Mm,
you're 14 or 15, I guess you can get on with your parents' consent. So, is this the kind of world that we want to live in? I think we talked about something similar here in the past because Utah did something similar, right? Where in an effort to keep children off of social media, they have to screen everybody, right? Because these third
right,
party verification systems require some form of checking, whether it's you providing your ID or whatever. I mean, there are, I guess, weak systems as well that would just ask you questions. What day were you born? Which is so easy to just lie about.
right,
But however you do it, you have to give this screen, apply this filter to everyone, and so you are creating a burden even on the adults who want to get online. Is this another iteration of fascism in Florida? I mean, do we want the government to have this type of control over our lives? Again, it isn't only about children, it's about an adult. So does this mean now everyone in Florida who wants to get on Facebook or Instagram or any kind of social media is going to have to what? Have a pause put on their account until this third party verification can verify that they're actually adults? And is that overly burdensome to adults' experience? I mean, getting online, using social media, using the internet is so paramount, right? It's so ubiquitous in our life. It isn't just some like, novelty that maybe that it used to be 20 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, even. Now it really is intrinsically tied to everything we do. Think about your jobs. Think about students in school, colleges, high school, not little kids, right? Who need it for their assignments. It's so part of intertwined with our lives. And to say
right,
that you have to go through this third party screening process to continue using it, is that a
right.
bridge too far?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is a bridge too far. That means everyone, and most likely what they would do is what we're starting to see rolled out with a lot of organizations is where they're doing ID checks, where you basically scan in your ID or hold your ID up to the webcam on the computer, and it scans it to verify your age and goes through a third party process. I don't like that, period. I don't think people should use that, have to have that just to get on Facebook or Instagram. And to be fair, they haven't detailed which social media platforms it was going to apply to, at least in the report that it said, and it specifically said it hasn't been determined which ones.
You're talking about the
But
Florida law?
yeah,
Well, isn't
yeah.
it signed already? I mean, it's signed into law, so wouldn't the legislation provide
At
that?
least according to that article that I read, it said it hasn't decided which one specifically. The law had something to do with it would apply to those that have algorithms that basically try to keep people on the platform or something like that. So it was very vague in that regard.
Not all
But
of them, though.
yeah, so I think it's probably intentionally vague so
Right.
that they can make it everybody get caught into it. But I don't like this
It's
idea that
probably,
everyone has to
it's
show
probably
ID.
done that way to provide an out because you have companies and lobbyists pushing against it. I mean, this article that I found talks about Meta, right, the parent company of Instagram and Facebook, opposing the legislation, saying it would limit parental discretion and raise data privacy concerns because of the personal information users have to provide to be age verified, which is what we are talking about. But by not specifying all social media or making it very specific in the law, it could create an out, right? Because now there's further argument about, well, who is a subject to and who isn't. And maybe a
Right.
company like Meta can say, oh, well, we don't fit the definition of the law because what we do with our algorithm is different from what you're describing here. And, it provides an avenue to at least make that argument and perhaps go to court and litigate over it.
Right. Yeah. So,
But there is something in the law that allows a civil action if the third party company holds on to your data even after terminating your account. So
Mm.
the law requires that they do not store your data. And if you can prove, I guess, that they've been holding on to it even after terminating you, you can sue them for damages.
Right. In some cases, I would agree with something like that, depending on how it's written. Um, there's not a lot of reasons why the companies should still be holding on to people's data if they don't have an account with them any longer and they don't have any connection with them any longer.
But we're talking, I believe, here about the third party verification company, not even the social media companies.
Oh yeah, they definitely shouldn't have it.
Yeah.
They definitely shouldn't have it.
And that's that
If
data
are
privacy
used,
concern.
right, if they are used, it should be to verify in the moment and then immediately delete. They shouldn't have any stored identity stuff, because then you've got these third party companies that aren't I mean, by the nature of being third party, aren't related to the service that you're actually trying to access, with this massive demographic data of people, not just adults but children as well. And if your point is protecting children, why would you want a company to have this massive role of children's not only name, birth date? If they're showing IDs, it might have their social security on it, it'd have their addresses on it. Like, no, why would you want that?
Right. Although it is interesting that it creates a cause of action to sue the company if they hold on to your data after terminating your account. But what about if they don't terminate your account? So what if you
Right.
get verified and they say, oh yeah, you're an adult, proceed, right? Like the bridge troll, but the troll is now still holding on to your data.
Right.
So that is a concern as well. So that's the data privacy. And I agree that there are serious concerns with that. What about on the other side?
Well, this also, I'm not sure what other side you mean, but this also
I was
restricts.
talking. Well, I was talking about not because my meta raised those two concerns, right? Data privacy being one. The other side of that was the parental discretion. Why are we taking the rights away from the parents and giving it to the government?
I think it's you know I think that's a good point. And I also think laws like this come about when people don't exercise their parental discretion. Like, here's the thing, if you don't want your child to be on Facebook or social media, then there are ways to restrict them from using. You can say that, well, they've got the device in their pocket. Yeah, well, you can go on their device and restrict apps on their phone. You have that right. You have that power as their parent. You can do that. It's effort on your part, but yeah, they're your children. So yeah, that effort is yours. It's not really on the shoulders of the company to look out specifically for your children. If you don't want them to do that, do that. If you don't want them accessing on there, put the computer in the living room if you don't want them on porn sites, right?
Yeah, but I think they're all on their phone now. So then you should limit access to their phone or not give them
And you
too young.
and you can do that.
Yeah.
There are ways to prevent which apps go on the phone. Like,
Right.
all of these devices have parental controls baked in to the operating systems.
Yeah.
And
But you know what's
even
interesting to me?
computers, we've had Net Nanny on the computer software for like 30 years now. Like,
A big issue, certainly in several of these statewide elections over the past few years, has been parental control in the context of schools and curriculums, right?
hmm,
They said that the polling data showed that the Republican candidate won the Virginia's governor race largely on that issue. That became a conservative issue. This idea that parents and not the government should determine what children are learning, what their children learn in school. So why is it that these parents are so adamant that they should be the ones making the decision when it comes to schooling, but are okay with the government making the decision when it comes to social media?
yeah, I don't think they look at it that way. Because if they're looking at the issue, that they don't want these kids on social media, they're going to look at that as a net win for their point of view, instead of looking at it as they're saying the government's determining whether or not kids at this age can be on there or not.
That's
They're going to be
literally
like,
what it is, right? It's a law from the government,
sure, sure,
signed by the governor of Florida, saying
sure.
that children are banned by the government from social media. So isn't that taking it out of the parents' hands? So if you're a
I
parent, you
agree.
would like your children to be on social media, too bad. The government says no.
Right. You can't have a private account until you're over 13.
Yeah.
You can't have your own account. No, I agree, but I think people who are for this type of legislation aren't going to look at it like that.
What other way is there to look at it though? I don't understand.
Uh, because if they want that restriction period, they're looking at it, okay, now it's in place. We win.
But it's still the government. It's still a law that they got passed.
I
I mean,
listen, I agree with
isn't a
you.
logical inconsistency.
I agree with you. I do. I
Yeah.
just I just think that
I will
people are
see,
gonna
but to be fair, we'll see. I don't know enough about the politics of this particular issue. Maybe those same conservative minded parents who were so up in arms about school choice will also be up in arms about this law, right? And come out against it the same way and say, hell no,
listen.
we're not voting for a candidate who's going to take that right away from us. Because that's what they said when it came to schools, right? When it came to the curriculum, they say, we are
Yeah.
not voting for a candidate who would have the government decide the kind of curriculum that our kids are going to learn. So maybe they will apply logical consistency and say the same thing in
No,
Florida.
no, they won't.
They
We
won't.
have an epidemic. We have a rampant epidemic of cognitive dissonance in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I
How do
think
you know it's
those
the same parents though who are advocating for the parental control over the curriculum and also who are against parental control on social media? How do you know that's the same group?
because they're wearing the same hat.
Okay.
They're wearing the
You
same
know,
red hat.
do you know this for a fact? I mean, or is that speculation? I don't know like the group that's driving this is who's really behind it. I really don't know.
You can recognize them by the red hat.
So is that a fact? It's the same people who are pushing for.
I fact, I don't know if it's a fact. I'm just saying that I have a hunch that they are the same type of people. Um, they're conservative by the most part. And I have a hunch that they're all similarly they all think similarly.
Okay, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting as I guess as a political science query, right? Because you might have people who believe in what big government, government control, government knows better. This would seem to be one of those type bills. The government
You
knows,
would think.
not a right, not the parent should get to decide because literally it takes the choice away from the parents. So
You would think,
let's
but
yeah, let's look at that. I want to know more about the polling of which groups of people supported this law, and let's do our own poll on this law, and then maybe we'll have some insight because when people respond to our poll, we can see their reasoning and try to figure out why they're for or against it, and maybe that'll tell us something.
yeah.
So the poll question of the week is: do you agree with banning children under 14 from using social media by law?
Yeah. Like I said, I think I just have a hunch that some of these conservative changes and things we're seeing are the same type of people.
Could be. It could be.
Yeah.
So what would explain that though? Why would they want their own decision making to prevail when it comes to the curriculum, but the government's decision making to prevail when it comes to social media?
I don't think they're seeing it that way. That's what I'm saying. I don't think they are separating that.
Whether they're cognizant of that or not, why do you think they're for this on the one hand, but for that on the other hand? What do you think explains that?
Did attack on the social media stuff. attack on what they see as liberal propaganda, indoctrinating their children.
That's interesting.
I mean, that side constantly has the complaint that social media companies have liberal bias, right?
Where the algorithm is biased.
The algorithms are liberally biased. I mean, that's how we get Truth Social and what was the other one that popped up? They think, oh, well, we need our own conservative social media platform, which is just ridiculous in itself to have. And I saw, and you know what?
And
Even
that's
more,
hypocritical.
I saw something even more ridiculous. At the same token, I saw someone post on, I forget what platform it was, saying that we need a liberal social media platform because our ideas aren't being seen. Like, this is just insanity. We need a specific liberal one. We need a specific conservative one.
That's
It's the
yeah,
same with we need
they're putting
liberal
themselves in a
media.
bubble, like to the fullest extent possible, and that's
Yeah.
why we're not making any progress as a country. Uh,
Yeah. That
I
was the first time I saw someone say that we needed a liberal one. Like,
yeah,
what? And I think it has more to do with it's coming out now when people are speaking out against what's happening in Palestine, and some of the messages are being perceived as being blocked or de
yeah,
prioritized, so
censored or
they're not
whatever.
getting out.
Yeah,
Right. And so people are like, oh, we need a platform that's gonna not take these stands. And so that's what's coming from that side. But it's like, it's just this separation in everything. Just the fact that we have conservative news
right.
versus liberal news is ridiculous. Like, it's news.
I mean,
It's
news. Yeah, yeah. So, all right. One point I wanted to make, and I don't want to get into a whole thing on this week because we're out of time, but
yeah.
TikTok, we know that there is talk of banning TikTok in the US unless it's sold to an American company or,
Yes.
whatever. But I just wanted to make the point that Queenslink apparently has gone viral via TikTok because we are now at over 11,000 letters that were sent to the state leaders, the governor, the speaker of the assembly, and the majority leader of the Senate, asking for that EIS to be included in the final budget. I think it was at 3,600 only a day or two ago, and it exploded to 11,000. Apparently, this is largely attributed to TikTok. There's a lot of engagement on our videos on TikTok, and the Queenslink team has been doing a tremendous job putting that content out. Every day, there's something else going out, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, all the social media pages. They're really on their ball with that, and it's made a big difference. I mean, 11,000 emails that were sent through our site. That's pretty
Mm.
big.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the things that makes TikTok valuable as a social media property is that potential to spread organically,
Mm.
um, like that when you don't see it in other platforms. It's being tempered now, as they're getting more into monetization and whatnot, but there's still that potential for things to catch fire because of the way the algorithm is set up.
Yeah, yeah. So keep doing that, guys. You can go on my page and get the link, or go to thequeenslink.org and you can follow the link there to get involved. And it's very easy. It takes less than 2 minutes to fire off those letters. Please keep doing that because the budget is still being negotiated and we need that $10 million for the Queenslink EIS included in the budget if we want to ensure that rail, that transit is preserved along that right of way, as we know the plans for the park component proceed. So there you go on that. Last topic, and we can be very brief on this. RFK Jr. is threatening to sue the state of Nevada. This is an election law issue. He apparently is being told that he won't make the ballot in Nevada now because when he petitioned as an independent candidate for president, he did not include a running mate on the petition. And this is a law in Nevada that independent candidates must do this. His campaign asked the Board of Elections there if it was required when they were getting the petitions together, and they were told no, but that was wrong information. It is different when it comes to presidential candidates who are running on a major party line, and so that might have been the cause of the mix-up. He, of course, is taking this and running with it, threatening to sue. His lawyer is making some statements that I would describe as embarrassing because he's saying the Democratic Party invented a new rule to mess with us. It's like, it's not a new rule. It's literally the law in Nevada. I understand being given wrong information and that being a terrible thing. I mean, I would feel, anyone should feel terrible about that, especially something as high stakes as running for president. Yes, that information should be correct. That's given out by the Board of Elections. But the law is the law, right? And you can't have staffers making up their own law by telling candidate. Imagine that they can just tell a candidate they like, oh no, you don't got to do it that way, and then, oh well, they told us that, so now we can do it this way because some guy in the office said that. I mean, no, this is a candidate for president. He does have a responsibility to follow the law, regardless of what the staffer at the Board of Elections told him, right?
Right.
But
Right. Yeah.
still a crazy story. I mean, think about this: RFK Jr. Getting caught up, right? Getting tripped up on these ballot access laws. I mean, that might be something to think about. I mean, someone like that you would expect would be able to access any state's ballot very easily, but he's having trouble himself.
Yeah, you would have thought that he had all of his I's dotted and T's crossed.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
not easy. I guess this is why you need another good reason why you need a good election lawyer to help you navigate this often arcane and confusing process.
yeah.
So, yeah, yeah, crazy times. I just wish the lawyer that he does have would stop talking like that. Let me see if I can pull up real quick some of his quotes here, because the guy's name is Paul Rossi. I'm thinking, man, even with an Italian name, like you're embarrassing me. You know what I mean? And also you're embarrassing lawyers, right? The legal profession by making these claims. Quite honestly, they're Trumpian kind of claims. And I guess he thinks that that works, that plays politically
Mm,
amongst certain groups. But you're an officer of the court,
right.
and for you to be saying that the goons on the Democratic side are making up laws and trying to mess with us. Like, this is an actual law that's been on the books for a very long time in Nevada. This isn't a new rule, So how come his lawyer didn't know it? And I understand. Listen, you're talking about 50 states, and we talked about how immigration law is under the purview of the federal government. Well, when it comes to ballot access, even though it's a presidential election, each state has its own rules. And so it's confusing. I get it, right? It's confusing for one state, but now imagine you trying to navigate 50 different states' rules. I mean, yeah, there's got to be some understanding there that even a really good election lawyer is not going to have every state's election law memorized as far as ballot access requirements for running for president. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but there is a responsibility, I think, and the responsibility falls on his lawyer, him, ultimately him, his campaign, and him personally, to know that, to figure out what the rules are and abide by them.
And that's you're a Kennedy, bro. Like you're coming from a family that is like one of the most politically ingrained families in the country. You should know this.
And you should be able to figure it out. Yeah. But I do have sympathy, though. I mean, because one way you might try to figure something like that out is by asking, right? I mean, it doesn't
Just
take the place of actually
fast.
reading the law. I mean, that would really be the best course of action, reading the
Yeah.
election law. But if you do reach out to the Board of Elections, you also expect, if they answer you at all, they're going to give you accurate information, right? So I am
You
sympathetic
would
about that.
definitely expect.
But
Yeah, you would definitely expect that.
from a legal point of view, though, like we said, we just can't have BWE staffers making their own laws either. So
Right, right.
law is the law, sadly.
And before we jump to the bottom line,
Mm.
just think want to give our prayers out to the people in Baltimore with the collapse.
Keybridge,
I'm sorry,
Keybridge.
Keybridge?
Yeah, you're talking about the collapse of the Keybridge, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah. After the cargo ship ran into one of the support beams.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
just
and luckily, law enforcement was able to get the cars off of the bridge. They closed the bridge off from traffic because they saw that the ship was coming. I guess the ship signaled that it lost power and was heading towards the bridge, and so no,
I think some were still on the bridge though.
I don't think anyone was hurt. And
They're
I
looking.
thought they got all the cars off the bridge,
I think they're looking right now still. But
but they did close off the bridge to traffic on both ends so that people weren't driving
right,
when this happened.
right. So it was severely limited if anything was on there. But last I read there was mass casualties feared,
Hmm.
but that was a while ago. Now it looks like I think they've identified at least 6 people missing. There's no deaths. No deaths have been immediately confirmed, which is a good thing. But there's 6 people missing. So hopefully everybody gets found and rescued, and everything. Everyone's safe out of it.
Yeah, people always have that fear of driving over a bridge and having a collapse. I mean, this wasn't just uh, for no reason or for wear and tear or whatever. I mean, it was a cargo ship that hit it, but it's
Yeah, it's
kind of a nightmare scenario that I think a lot of people have, right? Like, how safe are these bridges really?
right. I saw the video and just first, why was the cargo ship that close to the support beam, which apparently it seemed like they might have been having some issues that probably
I
put them
believe
there.
the ship lost power and it was basically out of control. It just kind of went that.
Right. And then when it hit that beam, like the whole thing just collapsed like
That's
paper.
very easily, right? Like a Lego set or something. I was surprised at that
That
myself.
surprised me. Like,
How frail the bridge appeared to be. Yeah, but I guess people
yeah,
underestimate the force of that ship hitting it. Also,
yeah, absolutely. So, but here's hoping everyone gets rescued and is okay.
yes, absolutely. Um, I would say the bottom line this week is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? We have many issues in our society that we try to tackle, and we often hear, well, you'll never completely solve them. The issue will never completely be eradicated. And that's often used as an excuse to not
Mm,
do anything. And I think that's a very counterproductive and dangerous approach, right? I think we should be doing all we can to make a situation better, knowing that it's never going to be perfect, right? We're always going to have crime. We're always going to have these ills in our society, but we do have a responsibility to do everything in our power to make it better and leave this place a little bit better than we found it.
I think that's a good sentiment. Very good one. And you can find us on YouTube. Um, well, of course, here every Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern
On Facebook.
Standard, Facebook, and Instagram, and wherever podcasts are. And yeah, join us, comment, argue, yell, whatever you do, take part in the conversation and try to look at something from a different angle.
Yes, absolutely. As always, we thank you all for joining us. We've got work to do, and we'll catch you next time. Good night.